Ted Dabroski, thank you for joining us on the Illinois channel. And you are a policy analyst with Wirepoints, and we are going to be talking about some of the details in the Chicago teachers strike. You have come out with a series of graphics that illustrate what I believe you would argue shows that the citizens of Chicago cannot afford more money, and that whether it's the mayor's proposal or what the teachers are searching for, neither one of those is affordable. But why don't you take it from there and tell us what some of your major themes are?
Yes, I think you've hit it squarely right. The people of Chicago, the ordinary residents of Chicago, can't afford, either Lightfoot's proposal, which she called is one of the most, I forget the term she used, but it's a big one of the biggest proposals ever given to CTU. Chicagoans can't afford that, and they certainly can't demand the bigger demands that the CTU has. And so it's a situation where Chicago is already insolvent in most people's opinions, anybody that's looking at the numbers. And Chicagoans are already on the hook for massive amounts of debt. And so it's really hard to think about how Chicagoans can really afford either one of these outcomes, regardless of how the strike ends up and what terms are agreed to.
I think what you would argue is that the Chicago Teachers Union salaries, what they are presently making, and I would also say that the teachers unions say that their strike is not all about salary. They would argue perhaps that's not even primarily about salary, that it's also about having more librarians, more nurses, and different functions at the schools. But I think you would argue that the Chicago teachers are already making more money than the average Chicagoan, the average taxpayer, and even when you compare it to the average Chicago household.
Well, Terry, I would start with one point before that. If we could pay teachers 2 times and 3 times more, we might consider that. But I think you have to back up to the point that Chicago is already a junk-rated city. It's got the lowest credit rating of any city, and I think you may have a graphic on that. Chicago is the lowest downgraded city of any of the major cities in the country. CPS is also junk. It's already 5 notches into a junk rating, and that's below Detroit. So there is no room for more fiscal problems in the city. Number 2, if you look at home values, if you look at across the country, you look at the major cities, Chicago is in real terms, people's home values are deteriorating. So people's nest eggs are being hit. If you look at virtually every statistic, Chicago is shrinking. Of the major cities in the country, Chicago is the only one shrinking consistently. So, even if you wanted to pay teachers more, somebody's got to start respecting the fact that there is no room. People are leaving. They've had massive tax hikes under Rahm Emanuel. Home values are stuck. It's a really dangerous proposition to even put on higher salaries, which means more pensions. And lastly, if you look at the pension debt, the amount that each household is on the hook for, it is massive, and there's no way that Chicagoans are going to stick around in the numbers that are needed. I think anything that makes it worse is just asking for big trouble, and I think both Lightfoot's proposal and the CTU's demands make things worse.
Yeah, here we have a graphic that says the Chicago households are burdened with nearly $145,000 in overlapping retirement debt, and that's an important point for people to understand when we talk about the teachers unions or the firemen or the police. They all are getting their money from the same people, the Chicago taxpayers. And I think you would make the point as you look here, how many dollars are owed and how many are underfunded on these pensions, that there's really just not enough money to go around to meet all of these.
Yeah, Terry, look, when you add up all the pension debt that the city owes, that the Chicago public schools owe, what Chicagoans are on the hook for Cook County, their portion, the state, add them all up, and based on Moody's, so this is based on the numbers that you're showing are based on Moody's, and retiree health debts, it's $150 billion. Split that up over every single household in Chicago, and you're talking about $145,000. But I have to warn something. About half of the households could never afford to pay down that debt. So the ones that have means, for example, let's say everybody's $75,000 and over, you're talking about $400,000 of debt per household in Chicago, of those who have the means to pay this debt off. I'm sorry, but once they start figuring that out and the taxes start rolling in, the tax hikes start rolling in for people to pay that back, there's a lot who will leave.
Here we have a graph that you provided to us. Let me bring your name down. And you show that these are pensions, final salaries. Well, why don't you explain what we're looking at?
Well, so right now, a career teacher who just retired in 2018, who stuck around CPS for their entire career, 30 to 34 years of service, he or she is finishing with a final salary of about almost $100,000, and their starting pension is $70,000, and that will double in 25 years due to the COLAs. So you're talking about very, very expensive pensions already, pensions that are far higher than anybody. This pension, that $70,000 pension over a lifetime of a teacher, will be worth about $2.3 million. That's a lot, and you're asking an ordinary Chicagoan, many of them struggling, to pay more taxes, more fees. It's just adding up, and this is the burden that's happening. And when you talk about, and I think you have a chart that has the salary proposals that Larry Lightfoot has made. What Lori Lightfoot has promised, and apparently this isn't enough for the CTU, she has promised to take average teacher salary so that in 5 years the average teacher salary will be $100,000. That's a 24% raise over 5 years, guaranteed in a 5-year contract. Now, most ordinary Illinoisans don't have a guaranteed contract. They don't have guaranteed raises. Many of them are just struggling to make ends meet. And so it's really, really tough. You look at the average school nurse will go from $49,000 a year today to $73,000 in 5 years' time. That's a 48% increase. That's great for them. It's a huge strain on the Chicagoans based on the numbers we talked about, all the debts and the fact that the city's under so much strain.
Yeah, I don't have all the graphics that you were providing to us, which we appreciate. Maybe we can, unless they settle this in short order, maybe we'll have to do a follow-up and where we get a little more time. But I believe what you had, if I'm remembering the statistic, the average Chicago household was something like $56,000. So when you show that a salary would be, something like $72,000 for one nurse, and again, it's not only a cost that would be going up double digits, but you're also talking about the fact that the teachers unions are arguing they need to have more of these positions, and that's what the mayor is saying. I think, isn't that right? The mayor, do you remember offhand how much the mayor's proposal would cost versus what the teachers unions proposal would cost?
Well, I know the salaries, which of course were stated in the papers, Tribune and others, was $350 million over the 5 years. What the CTU wants, and the mayor has said, would cost about $2.5 billion. And that's because they want thousands and thousands and thousands of more positions in addition to all the raises and other benefits like affordable housing. And so I think what she's saying is whatever the union is asking for is just way out of line. She's already gone, and she's saying that she's done her part. She's done a very, in my estimation for taxpayers, it's overdone what she's offered them. And even then, that's not enough for them, and they're striking.
Yeah, for those of us who are downstate, is there a reason why we should care, or is this only impacting Chicago taxpayers?
No, this is there's a lot of reason that the downstaters should care, and first and foremost is that we've seen tax hikes across the state in the past, and more money going from the state to Chicago for pensions last year. There's a long discussion about the funding formula, but there's no doubt that Chicago was the big winner in that new education funding formula. So in many respects, some of us have said that the state has been bailing out CPS. But it goes more than that, because what you're looking at in the contracts are two more things. One is the fact that if Chicago keeps this thing going like it's doing with all its financial mess, it could go bankrupt. And that has huge implications for the state and for anybody who lives in this state. Number two, what you're seeing in the contract negotiations is the unions are adding all kinds of things outside of normal salary and benefits. They're adding number of hours kids can sleep in the class, to sanctuary type demands. It's a big deal, and the question is, how is that going to impact every single union negotiation across every district in the state? Are they going to be just as belligerent as the CTU has been? I wouldn't be surprised to see more copycats across the state.
Before we close out, in your estimation, aside from the cost, is there anything wrong with the Chicago's Teachers Union putting in the contract for the mayor to sign how many positions there should be at each school?
Well, this is a very interesting topic. My colleagues here at Wirepoints, we decided to look. This is the third contract in a row that the union has struck. It's becoming a kind of a standard operating mode. If they don't like the contract, they strike. So what we did is we looked across the country to see how many states allow for strikes. Where are strikes legal and where are they illegal? The first point I would make is none of our neighbors allow strikes. They don't allow strikes. Not Indiana, not Wisconsin. None of them are direct neighbors. So we're the only ones, and we're only one of 12 in the country that allow for strikes. So we are enabling the unions to strike, and the way the laws are set up, in theory, they're only supposed to strike over salaries and benefits, but what they're doing is they're holding out for a whole bunch of other social justice type issues they're holding out on the money in order to get more social justice issues done. And it's just become overly cumbersome, and it makes it impossible for somebody like Lori Lightfoot to negotiate with them.
Well, let me say this to my viewers. Ted is very knowledgeable. You can agree with him or disagree with him, but he has a lot of facts and figures. Again, we'll try to bring you more. Unfortunately for us, he's a very popular guy today, and he's got to go off and do a radio interview. And Ted, we appreciate you joining us in the short amount of time we have.
Thank you, Terry.
We'd love to go into further detail, if we can, in the near future.
Anytime.
Right. Thank
you
so much. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.